All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Carla Kawara, and I'm a program specialist within the Professional Services and Human Capital portfolio. Today's topic is Scope Review Best Practices with Brian Booth. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, please note that today's meeting is being recorded, and you may opt out at any time. Today's presentation will be made available for direct download in the chat box. If you have difficulty downloading it, you may direct message me or my co-hosts, Tim Balzer or John DeWolf, and we will be happy to help you obtain a copy. We ask that you remain muted during the entirety of today's presentation and use the Q&A pod at the bottom center of your screen to ask questions, and we will address those at the Q&A period at the end of today's presentation. We are capturing attendance on our end through the Zoom system, so CLPs will automatically be sent out to everybody on today's call, and there's nothing that you need to do on your end. But if you do not receive a certificate within 10 business days, we ask you to please email us at pshcevents@gsa.gov. That's pshcevents@gsa.gov. Finally, a post-event survey will be emailed out to everyone on today's call. We ask that you please take a few minutes to fill that out. It would really help us improve your office hours experience in the future. Today's speaker is Brian Booth. Brian works for the Customer Engagement Branch within GSA's PSHC portfolio and hails all the way from Vancouver, Washington, where he lives with his wife, son, and 3 cats. He and his small but mighty team spend a lot of time reviewing partner agency requirements, and recommending acquisition solutions for professional services. With that, it's a pleasure to hand it over to you, Brian.
Great. Thank you very much, Carla. Glad to be here. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Yeah, okay, good. Glad to be here to talk about scope reviews. As Carla mentioned, I have a small but mighty team of 3 of us right now, and we do handle a lot of scope reviews. So I just took a look at some of the numbers. Last year, my team and I reviewed 500, well, we did over 540 scope reviews. This year, we're already over 260. So we see a lot of requirements for services, contracts that come through our office, and they come from all different sorts of agencies, from defense to civilian to even some state and local entities once in a while. So we've seen pretty much, I would say, under the sun for services contracts, although every once in a while we still get something new that kind of surprises us that this is being done by the government. It's like, wow, that's really cool. The government does a lot of stuff, especially in the arena of professional services. So I'm happy to be here to talk about the scope review process for us, what it means to you as a potential buyer or a requiring office for professional services, and kind of explain some of the best tips on if you're going to get a scope review, what should you be including as far as data elements, what the expectations are for requirements, et cetera. So I'll go through that a little bit today. Here's the agenda real fast. Go to the next slide. So why is it important to get a scope review? What is a scope review? How can it help you? What are some of the key information that we ask for, and why do we ask for it? Also, what are the different relationships between the solutions that we manage with GSA, professional services, and human capital, those solutions that we manage, and how do they possibly match up to your requirements? And then some other resources to find out more information about those solutions and some of the contract programs that we offer. And then, of course, hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions. But as Carla mentioned at the beginning, please, if you have any, go ahead and put them in the Q&A chat or the function for Zoom. And hopefully we can answer those while I'm presenting. And then if we can't do it, then we'll hopefully answer those at the end. So first of all, let's start off with what is a scope review and why is it important? As I mentioned, me and my team see a lot of them. So we hope that they're providing some benefit back to those requiring offices that ask for a scope review. But if you haven't ever heard of it before, this is something that we offer from our portfolio for either programs or contracting acquisition workforce folks that are doing their market research or they're in the phases of acquisition strategy formulation. And a scope review is an important step in some of that. Some agencies view it as so important, especially for services contracts, that they make it kind of a mandatory checkbox that you've done a scope review as part of your market research and acquisition strategy development. The reason why it's important as far as market research goes is because we are obligated to look at what other contract solutions are already existing for the federal government and if we can use them. That's part of the category management principles that we should be adhering to as the federal acquisition workforce. And it's something that is also prescribed in some ways with the FAR and looking at existing programs, mandatory programs, or preferred programs for certain types of requirements. I think a scope review, especially for services requirements, is also very helpful because services requirements are often complex and messy. It's not, a simple, straightforward product. I have to get this particular type of forklift. It needs to have, forks of this dimensions. It needs to have so much horsepower. That seems to be a little bit more simple and straightforward when you're dealing with products and some services that are very, very straightforward. Maybe I need a contractor to come in and teach a particular class, a contracting 101 class, and it has to have certain things that are taught. Those types of services are fairly simple and straightforward. But for most professional services requirements, they can be complex and messy. So it helps to get a scope review done so that you can better navigate what types of contract solutions are already out there, existing, and might be a fit for your particular requirement. So that is one of the other outcomes of a scope review, is that you get confirmation. If there is a contract solution, at least that GSA manages, that might be a fit for your professional services requirement. And sometimes that confirmation is going to be a big piece of your acquisition strategy. And so you can then go forward knowing that, okay, I know that there is a solution available perhaps under the schedules program, so I can use FAR 8.4 ordering procedures. Or now I understand that OASIS is a potential vehicle and maybe the best fit for my requirement. I can look into ordering off of FAR 16.505 ordering procedures. And then prepare your acquisition staff for that. Maybe they need to go do some schedule training because they haven't ever used the schedules program before, or maybe they need to get their OASIS delegation of procurement authority. So they would have to go do that before they can actually issue a solicitation under OASIS. So confirming if there is a contract solution out there that matches your requirement, and then that enables you to take those next steps as far as what do I need to do to get to the endpoint where I can post a solicitation or a proposal, a request for proposals, or post a request for quotes, and then finally get contractor support services. The other thing that we do, at least my team does when it comes to scope reviews, is that we try to provide a holistic analysis of your requirement, not just take one or two data elements and try to match it up to a solution that way. There are some key data elements and factors that we definitely look at, and we'll get into the details of that in a little bit. But I did want to just kind of reconfirm that we look at your draft PWS, we look at your draft IGCE, we look at the NAICS code that you're considering using, we look at the different contract types that you're considering including as part of your requirement. We look at the period of performance. We look at possibly the geographic area, the place of performance that needs to be performed. Sometimes that can be an element to consider. So we ask for a lot of information. And the reason is because any one of these factors sometimes can make a difference as to which contract solutions are actually going to be a possible fit for your requirement, and which ones may not be. Sometimes a solution based off of its description may seem like it's going to be a match, but there might be other elements that you haven't considered that make it perhaps not a match for you. So we try to take in all the data so that we can get a better context of your requirement and then provide you some recommendations for a solution that way. So that's mostly what we do and what a scope review is as far as our perspective goes, but what is it not? So there are a few things that a scope review, when it comes to my team, that we definitely don't do well, or this is not what it is. The first of all, it's not an RPA type of automated function. That's robotic process automation. There is a tool out there called the rapid review process, and it basically takes your proposed NAICS code, matches it up with NAICS codes that we have on a table, and spits back out some possible solutions based on just those number matches. That's not a bad tool when you have fairly straightforward and simple requirements, especially for products. So if it's that forklift example, you need a forklift, there's probably only one special item number under the schedules program that you can get forklifts. And it may, there might be one NAICS code, manufacturers of forklifts, that matches your requirement. The same thing with the training example too. Oftentimes, it's pretty clear cut. I need training for my management cadre at my organization. They need to know how to lead people. There's a good chance that the NAICS code is 611430. We may have one or two possible solutions for that. But when it comes to services requirements, as I mentioned earlier, they can be complex and they can be pretty messy. I don't believe, in my opinion, that a rapid review process is a good fit for those requirements oftentimes, because you might have a requirement that includes general management consulting. You need a contractor to come in, provide some support services, kind of help you develop policies, maybe provide some recommendations for changing your organization's management structure. But also you might need some IT support included as part of that requirement. You might need some more administrative type support included as part of that requirement. So you might have a principal purpose NAICS code of, say, 541611 for general management and administrative consulting services, but that NAICS code will match you up with 8 or 9 different possible solutions, some of which have no relation to your actual requirement. So that's the downfall of using something like a rapid review or robotic process automation. Eventually, AI will probably take over my job, and maybe it'll do a much better job of it in the future, but it's not there yet. So right now, this is the extent of the automated review process that we currently have. So I don't recommend it for services requirements, and hopefully you're here because this is the professional services human capital office hours, so you are often dealing with services requirements. So I don't recommend using something like that. The other thing that a scope review is not, it is not a binding determination of scope. It's a recommendation from us to match up your requirement with possible contract solutions that we manage. But it doesn't mean that this is for sure going to match this one particular area. Keep in mind that it's always the ordering contracting officer's responsibility and right to determine which contract solution they're going to use. Maybe we deem it to be 100% match, but you may have other internal policies that guide you to using different vehicles. So whatever we recommend, it's something that's probably a useful piece of information for you, as I mentioned, in developing your acquisition strategy, but it's not a binding determination of scope. Besides that, we also are looking at oftentimes draft information. Your requirement could change from the time that you get a scope review to the time that you actually go to issue a solicitation. So just because we said it was, we do recommend maybe OASIS Pool 1 for your requirement, but later on that you find the actual program office, the requiring owner, maybe they need a lot more IT services than was originally estimated. And now maybe that scope has shifted. Maybe it would be a better fit for an IT vehicle instead of a professional services contract vehicle. So it's a good recommendation for you to point you in the right direction and help you build that acquisition strategy. It's not a binding determination of scope. Keep in mind also, as I mentioned, this is not an AI bot that's doing these things. It is a team of humans, and so we all make human mistakes sometimes. So we may have overlooked something as we're doing a review. We may have not seen a particular piece of information that to you is key, and maybe something that you recognize as being very, very clear, but where we don't have some of that internal knowledge of your particular organization. We may make a recommendation that doesn't seem quite right to you. And that's understandable because we don't always know exactly the minutia about the requirements that you're managing, your offices are managing, or that you're acquiring for other offices. The last thing that a scope review is not, it is not a recommendation for a specific contractor. Now, typically, the result of a scope review is that we're going to tell you that we believe your requirement will fit with a particular contract vehicle. Maybe it's OASIS, maybe it's the schedules program. We'll provide you probably either a pool under OASIS that we recommend that you look into for market research, or that you go straight to that pool for issuing your RFP. Or we might give you a SIN or two, a special item number or two, under the schedules program that we think would be the best world for finding those industry partners that you can match up with. And sometimes we'll provide you with some information on those industry partners, but that doesn't mean we are recommending any specific industry partner. In some cases, I know that what I've done is I've sent either capability statements or price lists from particular industry partners, just as an example, to reinforce my recommendation for a particular special item number. Because the special item numbers under the schedules program sometimes aren't the best descriptive, wording, and so it may be kind of hard to understand. Is this 541611 LIT special item number a better fit for my requirement than 541611, which is a different special item number? So sometimes we may supply either price lists that kind of back up our recommendation, because they may have labor categories under those price lists that match the labor categories that you have under your requirement. Sometimes it'll also show that there's some disparities with the schedules program in particular. It can be interesting because you may have one contractor under 541611 LIT for litigation support services. You may have another contractor under 541611, which is just for general management administrative consulting. They may have the same labor categories, but they may have different special item numbers as part of their contract. So sometimes we'll send you price lists and capability statements to show that you can go either way in those cases. With the schedules program, that's kind of unique. With OASIS, it's a bit different. With HCATS, it's a bit different. Their pools are set up by NAICS codes, which I won't get into the full details of that. But in those cases, when we make one recommendation, that we're not going to say you can also go to another pool, except in some extreme circumstances where you might have something like a research and development requirement that doesn't really clearly fit into one of the exceptions to that NAICS code. But besides that, usually we just recommend one pool from something like OASIS or HCATS. So it's not a recommendation for a specific contractor. It's not a binding determination of scope, and it's not an automated process. When you ask for a scope review from my team, you're going to be dealing with humans and not ChatGPT. Although I hear ChatGPT is great, I haven't used it yet. So that's a little bit about what the scope review is and what it is not, from what we do on that end, on the back end of it, and how we look at your requirements. But how we look at those requirements is very much up to how they are written by you or your program office. And I wanted to pull out a couple examples that we've seen from real statements of work or performance work statements that have come through my team for requirements that we've reviewed. So there's the one on the left, which says, as stated above, the intent of this work is to identify population boundaries, quantify diversity statistics, population parameters, et cetera, Species to be examined include Cisco lake whitefish, Dreissenid mussels, and lake trout. Then you have example 2 on the right-hand side, where this performance work statement establishes the requirements for contractor-provided solutions in support of OCIO. The contractor shall provide all personnel, supervision, and other services necessary to perform the work as defined in this PWS in support of the agency's Office of the Chief Information Officer. I can tell you from a reviewer's perspective, I can look at the one paragraph scope of example 1 and instantly provide you a recommendation because it is so specific about what is needed for that requirement, that there are only a few solutions that could even be possible for this. There might be, 1, 2 under the schedules program. There's maybe one area under the OASIS program that I would recommend, but I can almost instantly tell you what I would recommend and what the solution possibilities are. From example 2, I have to make a lot of assumptions. I know that this work is going to be services, and I know it's going to be for an Office of Chief Information Officer at an agency somewhere. And having seen the PWS, I probably know the agency that this work needs to be done for, but that's about the extent of it. I'm sure in this example, of course, there are more details as you read through the entire PWS that once you hash it out, you can kind of figure out, okay, this particular office actually needs IT services support, or maybe they need organizational change management support, or maybe they need systems engineering and integration support, which can lead to all sorts of different options for potential solutions. But that is the scope paragraph in the performance work statement. So as a reviewer, I'm obviously going to have to go into a lot more detail. And as I mentioned, we do a holistic review. So we read through the entire SOW and PWS. Sometimes we skim some of the parts that are required clauses and terms and conditions that kind of apply to everything. But when it comes to understanding the work that needs to be done, I'm not going to get a quick, good feeling for what this requirement is without going into it in detail, which means that it's going to take a lot of time in many cases to really figure out what the core service is needed for this particular requirement. And we'll talk about how that's defined in many different ways. But one thing I would encourage, also I want to talk about this from the contractor's perspective. So if you were to send out your performance work statement and the actual solicitation, and if I'm the contracting representative for a company that would like to bid on this type of work or provide a proposal or provide a quote back, if I'm the contracting rep, I may understand example one, especially if I'm perhaps maybe a very small company. I'm the contracting rep, but I'm also a biologist and I'm the principal of that company. I probably know exactly whether or not my company can do that type of work. For some larger, medium-sized, large companies, or even larger, small companies, they probably have somebody that looks at all the different potential RFQs to see whether or not they should be putting together a quote or a proposal, but they may not be a specialist. They're likely not a fish biologist by any means. So they may have a hard time understanding whether or not they should even propose on work like this. They're probably going to have to go check with some of their subject matter experts within the company to see, is this something we really do? Because this is so specific, they may not understand. Vice versa with example two, just like I will have to do, the contracting representative for the company is going to have to go look at the PWS in a lot more detail to figure out, all right, is this in our lane of work? Do we do the specific type of service that is required here? Or maybe they'll find out, oh, actually, this requiring office really needs IT services. That's not us. We do organizational and change management support services. So my recommendation is that you take a look at the scope as it's defined in your SOW and PWS. In some cases, like example one, you may not want to be as specific as this. Maybe you don't have to list out all the exact species of fish or mussels that are going to be part of this study. Maybe you don't have to list out, the very specific biological terms of the study, but at least give it enough meat on the bone so that a contracting rep can understand, okay, they need biology experts to do some sort of fish studies. That is within our company's expertise. I'll pass it on to the principal of the company and we'll put together a proposal, or at least, we'll get into the more details. Do we have a biologist that really does know this kind of stuff? Conversely, for example, two, I would recommend maybe putting in a bit more information here as to what type of service is actually required. It doesn't have to be very specific, but if it is really IT support services, or if it's administrative support services, then list those things in general terms, so that anyone looking at this could get a good example or a good feeling for what type of work this is. Because if I see right off the bat that this is truly IT support services, even though it got submitted to my office for review, I'll probably instantly go to my counterpart at the IT category and ask them to also take a look at it to see, hey, the requiring office says this is for IT support services, but they gave it to us for OASIS. Would you also please take a look and see what you think? Which is another part of the holistic review. So those are just two examples. I recommend maybe taking the middle ground out of both of those, because that helps us as reviewers. It also helps the industry partners in determining whether or not they want to submit a quote or a proposal back for your requirement. So Now we talked about what the scope review is, what it's not, some hints and tips on writing your scope so that it makes it more understandable to those who are going to be looking at it. But why do we recommend doing this in the first place? Well, as I mentioned before, it can be an important step in your market research and then the development of your acquisition strategy. But there are a couple other things that a scope review can help you with. First of all, it can help you avoid risk. We all want to avoid risk. Nobody wants to get into trouble if we can avoid it. Some of the ways that it helps you avoid risk is that if you are looking at using a program like OASIS or HCATS, the beauty about those programs is they have a $10 million threshold where no one can protest it if it's below $10 million, with one exception. They can protest it if the requirement is out of scope of the contract. So if you have a requirement for facility support services, and you issue your RFP to OASIS, thinking that they can handle it. They do professional services all the time. Facility support services is not within scope of OASIS. Typically, that would be done under a NAICS code like 561620, I believe. That is not included under the OASIS contract program. If you had asked for a scope review, we would have noted that and made a recommendation possibly for another contract vehicle like building and maintenance operation, or possibly the facilities portion of the schedules program, because that could be protested since it's out of scope. Likewise with schedules doesn't have a dollar threshold limitation for protests, so anything could be protested, but much less likely to be protested if you're working with the correct industry partners, which brings me to the second part, industry participation. You may, especially this I think applies to the schedules program, but it does apply to our other IDIQs like OASIS as well. You may be looking at SIN such as, like I mentioned earlier, 541611 LIT for litigation support services. Or you might be looking at 541611, even though your requirement really is a better fit for litigation support services SIN. Because we do have that overlap, especially among the schedules program, where we have some contractors that may have a scheduled contract with one SIN, and then another contractor with SINs that are different, even though they do similar type of work. Or maybe a much more specific type of work. We try to help you, point you in the right direction for especially navigating the schedules program, to look at what SINs or special item numbers might be of most use to you, because those are the areas where you're going to find the industry partners that are best qualified, most experienced doing that type of work. As an example, I see a lot of requirements for environmental support services or environmental engineering, in particular engineering projects that a requiring office knows that it's engineering, so they may look at a SIN such as 541330ENG, which is for engineering services, and it can include environmental engineering services. But we also have SIN 541620, which is environmental consulting, and those firms often also have engineers as part of their staff or their labor category mix. So sometimes it might be better, if you weren't aware of that SIN, you would probably get a recommendation from my office to also look at that SIN if your requirement would be a fit for it. That can pair you up with potentially the better industry partners who can give you better proposals and better quotes, and have more experience in the areas that would address your particular requirement. The last thing that why I recommend scope reviews as well is that if you request a scope review, it's going to be reviewed by one of the subject matter experts for the particular contract program. So as I mentioned, for me and my team, our program managers manage the OASIS contract, as well as the professional services portion of the schedules program. I have my counterparts in human capital that manage the HCATS contract program, as well as the human capital portion of the schedules, et cetera, et cetera. So when you request a scope review, and you choose which contract solution that you're looking into, or if there's a portion of the schedules program that you're looking into, it's going to go to the appropriate people. So I'm not going to be taking a look at anything that's a facilities requirement unless it's mistakenly put in the wrong place. And even when I see those, I will go to my counterpart, Todd over there at facilities, and say, Todd, this looks like it's really in your lane. Can you please take a look at it? You know facilities, you know the contractors and the contracts that you guys manage better than I do. Please let me know what your recommendation is, because this is clearly a facilities requirement. So that is the other nice thing, is that when you request a scope review, you are getting in touch with the subject matter experts for the relevant programs that you're looking into. All right, some key information. As I mentioned earlier, we do a holistic analysis and review of your requirement. And part of that is that we ask for a lot of information. The reason why we ask for a lot of information is because it can really help determine the right contract solutions, if there are any. So as I mentioned before, we do take a look at your draft PWS, your draft IGCEs, but here's some other information that we often ask for or would like to see in many cases, as it gives us a clearer picture and more context to your requirement. The first one is a NAICS code. If you're going to look into using the OASIS program, you have to have a NAICS code, first of all. If you're looking at the schedules program, you don't necessarily have to have a NAICS code. It's very highly recommended. But I understand that we're talking services requirements. Services requirements are complex and messy. Sometimes one NAICS code doesn't really fit everything. So then you have to kind of determine, what is my principal purpose? Do I have a clear principal purpose? So I do recommend, trying to determine, if you can, a NAICS code that represents the principal purpose of your requirement. One thing I would try to avoid, if possible, is using some of those kitchen sink catch-all miscellaneous NAICS codes, as well as PSC codes that don't really help define the requirements in a lot of ways. I understand the use of them sometimes. Sometimes it does make sense. But for example, I've seen an uptick in requirements that have a NAICS code of 541990 assigned to them. I think the brief definition of 541990 is all other scientific and technical consulting services. But when you look at, excuse me, when you look at the census definition of that NAICS code, and they provide examples of those types of all other scientific technical consulting services, there are some odd ones in there, such as weather planning consulting services, maybe utility usage and policy consulting services. I know I'm probably screwing a few of those examples up, but they are really kind of oddball out there, miscellaneous scientific and technical consulting services. But there are some clear examples that Census provides. So I recommend, if you can, try to find a NAICS code and PSC code that are as narrow as possible for services requirements, but still kind of incorporate the principal purpose of the overall requirement. I know that's not always possible. And sometimes it makes more sense to assign a NAICS or a PSC that aligns with the mission of the office, excuse me, rather than trying to jumble it all together, because you might have a mix of IT services, administrative services, engineering services, management services, all in one requirement. And it really is difficult to pick the best one. But if you can, I do recommend being a little bit more specific. The same for PSC codes. If we see a PSC code for R499 or R799, which is kind of general management, other, or engineering, other, they aren't very specific. And sometimes it's impossible to be specific, but if you can, we do recommend you be as specific as you can. The other thing is knowing the background and mission. Most well-written PWSs contain a paragraph or a couple of pages even, sometimes describing the background of the particular requiring office, or the requirement if it's a large project or program, or the mission of the office and the agency at large. That doesn't always necessarily match with the work that's being asked for. Sometimes it's just good to know information, but sometimes they align very closely. If you're an office that supports R&D projects and you need a contractor to come in and provide some support services, likely you're going to need a contractor that knows what they're doing when it comes to research and development. And maybe they're just going to be doing some engineering work. Maybe they're going to actually be doing some general management consulting work, but maybe they have to have that R&D background, which leads me into subject matter expertise. If there is a certain area of expertise that you need from a contractor, it's good to spell that out in the PWS, or let us know in maybe the summary of your request and your requirement. Because like I said, maybe this is for a research and development office, but you really need engineering services, but that engineer needs to know about research and development for aircraft, as an example. So the requirement may be engineering, so 541330 NAICS code, but you really need someone that knows R&D work, or vice versa. Maybe it's engineering, but maybe they need to know about the health industry sector. We've seen a lot of that in recent years, go figure. So knowing the subject matter expertise that is needed by the contractor is also very helpful. It can sometimes provide us a clear recommendation for something like a subcategory within a SIN. So engineering is a good example. There's lots of different types of engineers out there: civil engineers, mechanical engineers, environmental engineers. Under the schedules program, there are subcategories for each of those things, and it will put you into better touch with the right industry partners if you know the subcategory to look into. That also includes the variety of work that needs to be done. So is this going to be all engineers all the time, or is this going to be maybe one biologist with a bunch of field technicians? What type of labor mix is in there? So the different labor categories, if you can define those from the government standpoint, what type of labor you need to see done, that is often very helpful for us, which is one of the reasons why we ask for IGCEs, because in particular with services requirements, IGCEs are built up around the different labor categories, right? So if we know that you need 3 mechanical engineers, 2 engineering technicians, and 1 program manager, we can probably take that IGCE even and give you a recommendation just based on that. Of course, we don't want to use just the one piece of information. We want to use more than that. But knowing the labor categories for services requirements and the variety of work that they're going to be doing, as well as the subject matter expertise that the contractor should bring to the table, are all very important elements to help us better define, well, helps you define your scope of work, helps us provide a better recommendation for you. So those are some of the key elements. There are a few more, but I did want to provide some examples of what I was just talking about, because this isn't always super easy to understand. So as an example of background, this is pulled out directly from a PWS that we saw. So the background for this office is that they manage cost-effective opportunities exist for reducing emissions and energy waste from the energy sector. Their mission is improving the efficiency of energy generation, replacing carbon-intensive fuels, assessing opportunities for cost-effective technology, et cetera, et cetera. Those are some pretty good specific descriptions of this office's mission and background, and I can probably guess what type of support they're going to need. Of course, I'll look into the more parts of the PWS, but that's a really good descriptive for me, being an outside observer and reviewer, for what their mission is, and I can hopefully make a good recommendation based off of that. The second is an example of expertise that is needed. So in this case, the office needed a contractor that can provide aviation logistics subject matter expertise for readiness-focused tasks, research and analysis in fielding, modernization, sustainment, maintenance and readiness of aircraft fleet systems, et cetera. So they need aviation logistics subject matter expertise. That can come in the form of many different labor categories. The labor categories they use might be an aviation logistics technician or a SME even. They might just say, hey, we need a bunch of engineers and maybe a subject matter expert, but they don't really define those very well. But if I know what the area of expertise that is needed based on the PWS, I can hopefully point them in the right direction for a potential solution. The last one is an example of a labor category that the government has defined. In this case, they need a senior accountant that can perform audits, solve complex accounting and financial problems. They can analyze the utilization and retirement of operating assets, advise on capital budgeting decisions, et cetera. So they've in this case, the government has detailed out what I need this labor category to be able to do. And that can also be very helpful for us, because we try to bridge the gap sometimes between contractor-defined labor categories and government-defined labor categories. And it's not always an easy gap to bridge, because in particular with the schedules program, schedule contract holders can supply their own labor categories, their own labor category titles, their own labor category descriptions and definitions, and they don't always match up to the federal government requirements. But sometimes we've seen a lot of different requirements from the government. We've seen a lot of priceless capability statements from contractors, so we can kind of help bridge that gap to know that if the government says, I need an aviation logistics subject matter expert, that it's equivalent over here under the, let's say, the engineering special item number to a SME level 3 or an engineer level 4 under a particular set of scheduled contractors price lists. Likewise, with ancillary work under the OASIS and HCATS programs, because there are standard labor categories, but they're based off of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the standard occupation classification taxonomy, which is fairly generic. And it doesn't really get into a lot of details or specifics about those types of labor categories. So knowing what the federal government needs in particular from a labor category can be very helpful for us as well in determining what might be a good solution for you in regards to scope. A couple other factors that we also find very useful and we ask for when you submit a scope review request is knowing the contract type. Do you need this set up as a blanket purchase agreement or an IDIQ contract? Do you need this a cost type contract? Can it be a hybrid? Are you planning on doing a hybrid? That can lead us to recommending one contract solution over another because not all contract solutions that we manage can support all contract types. The other one is commerciality. If it's non-commercial work, then that severely limits what solutions are possible. Other direct costs as well, while both programs that we manage, OASIS and schedules, portion of the schedules, can support ODCs, they support them in a variety of different ways. And so knowing how much that you estimate you're going to have to pay in other direct costs and what's available under the schedules program versus OASIS, say, can be a determining factor in which solution we may recommend. The same with period of performance. Schedules have a long lifespan for the most part, but they're individual to each contract and each contractor. The OASIS program, though, if you have an 8-year requirement today and you want to do it under the OASIS program, we would tell you we would not recommend that for you. We may recommend the follow-on program for OASIS Plus, but OASIS has a clear expiration date. It's going to expire in late calendar 2024. So in those cases, the period of performance could be very important to know whether or not we have a solution that might work for you. The last thing is the type of work. And I mentioned variety of work earlier, but this gets into more of the regulatory type of work. So if you need personal services, and not many agencies do, but sometimes they do, personal services are not allowed under either contract vehicle. The same with true architecture and engineering work that should be done under the Brooks Act, that is not allowed under OASIS or MAS. That has to be done according to FAR 36 ordering procedures. The same with construction. If it's major construction, alterations, remodels, new construction, that needs to be done also according to FAR 36 under the Davis-Bacon Act. Now, there is a little leeway under both programs for some minor alteration construction work, but very minor usually, and it has to be in support of a larger services requirement. It can't just be for construction itself. The last thing is certain other types of work. I call it glowing material. I live in Washington State. We're home of Hanford. Hanford's the largest Superfund site in the United States because that's where they did a lot of processing for plutonium for the World War II atomic bombs. Guess what? There's a lot of waste here on the Hanford Reservation, and it's a lot of radioactive waste. So knowing that if your requirement deals with radioactive waste, for instance, there are certain restrictions where that can't be done under certain contract programs because of the way that the contracts are written. So knowing that specific type of work, and this is just one example, but that can give us an idea that we really don't have a solution for you because of this and this and this. And one of them being that you need construction work and you need someone to come in and do architecture and engineering services because they're establishing something for glowing material, that type of stuff. So knowing all that, the type of work, is important for us as well, and it's another factor that we consider. All right, solution relationships, and I know I'm getting close to the end here, but I want to talk about this a little bit. So we try to match you up. We would try to match your requirement up with the contract solution that we manage. If we can't, we'll let you know that. Then you'll carry on your merry way with your market research and see if there's another contract program out there that exists that another agency might manage, or maybe you have to go to the open market. But we do try to match up your requirements with our solutions when possible. But please understand there is some overlap, particularly with services. I mentioned earlier a couple of different SINs that have the same NAICS code associated with them. And our contracts pretty much are all NAICS based in one way or another. There's a lot of overlap between OASIS, which handles professional services, and the schedules program. So we may make a recommendation to you not on the initial request for what you wanted to see. So if you had a request for an OASIS scope review, but we took a look at some of those factors, including the fact that you want to establish an IDIQ. This is commercial. It's going to be fixed price. then we may make a recommendation to use the schedules program because the scope is handleable under either contract program. They both can do 541611 work. They can both do engineering work under 541330, but we may make a recommendation based off of other factors. However, the NAICS is very important to know because it does apply to both. Also realize that the descriptions with the special item numbers under the schedules program and the pools under OASIS and HCATS are not all inclusive of the services that you might find there. Especially with OASIS Pool 1 is a good example. It encompasses 20 plus different NAICS codes that run the gamut from general management consulting to engineering to marketing, advertising, et cetera. It's a hodgepodge of services. So it's hard to put one description on that pool. It really is in those cases more important to know what your NAICS truly is for the principal purpose of work. Also, if you're doing your own research into possible solutions, you're not coming to us, that's fine. Understand the limitations of certain SINs and pools and contract vehicles. As I mentioned earlier, glowing material is one of those types of work. You cannot do remediation for radioactive work, or you can't do asbestos or lead paint mitigation under our remediation SINs under the schedules program. Those are some limitations that are written into the contract. So if you're going to do your own analysis of different contract solutions, keep those limitations in mind. As I mentioned, some of our SINs are very broadly defined. That's why we have SIN subgroups. So please take a look at those. The engineering example was if you have mechanical engineering need, then we have a subgroup for mechanical engineers under the engineering SIN, which is a much broader SIN. If you want to go to the source, you can definitely do that as well. The solicitations for schedules are posted on sam.gov. You can go see the latest, greatest update. I think they update that quarterly. Sometimes there's changes to SINs. Sometimes there's additions to the program. New SINs are added. Sometimes some SINs that aren't being used are deleted. You can also see the solicitation for OASIS. Even though it's not open any longer, it can provide you all the solicitation documents if you want to go see that. As well as visit eLibrary that contains all the contracts for the schedules program, as well as the OASIS program. Although if you're going to look at the OASIS and HCATS contracts, I recommend just going to their sites, which are typically just gsa.gov/OASIS or gsa.gov/HCATS. All right, available industry information. I mentioned this earlier, we may send you information about particular contractors, kind of reinforcing our recommendations, why the solution is maybe a benefit to you, but you can also do your own research. Savvy contractors for the schedules program, especially for professional services schedules, savvy contractors will put in a good capability statement along with their price lists. Those capability statements can describe what type of work they do, what kind of experience and history they have. The same with OASIS contractors. They have an external site called the OASIS Shared Interest Group. All OASIS contractors, I believe all, have included capability statements in there. Some of them are generic to their company. Some of them are very specific to the type of agencies they've worked with or the industry sectors that they have a lot of experience in. I think there's an OASIS shared interest group for health services or health-related services. There's ones just for COVID-19 response. There's some other ones for maybe space, vehicle development, R&D type work, and engineering as well. So go visit the different sites to see what the contractors have said about themselves. And sometimes that's information that we pull in to making a recommendation if we need to use that as well. Lastly, communicate with industry. Once you've got a scope review from us, we've provided some recommendations for a potential vehicle. And if you're still developing your acquisition strategy and doing your market research, then the next step is that we recommend communicating with industry, either through an RFI if you want to do it on your own, or what we really recommend is using the market research as a service, which is free to use, and connect with your customer service director to guide you through that process. The MRAS program has really just been rolling along very steadily the last couple of years. The industry's gotten really used to it. So when they see us issue an MRAS, as we call them, they tend to be very responsive. And the nice thing is that it's fairly formalized, so industry understands the template, they understand what's being asked for. Of course, we customize it to what your requirement is. So if there's some technical questions that you need to ask about to make sure that contractors truly understand the work that needs to be done or are truly capable of doing it, that's allowable, of course, under the MRAS program. But connect with your CSD to figure out it, to help you guide or help. Yes, they'll help guide you through that process. I did want to point out a few examples though. When you're researching industry, or if we're looking at potential industry partners and trying to help you do a bit of market research, these are some of the things that I recommend looking for. And these are bits of information you can find in those capability statements, both on the schedule side, if you go into eLibrary, or if you're looking at the OASIS Shared Interest Group site. So just pulled some examples out from capability statements from contractors. The first one up there, this company obviously has experience working with A123 risk management and auditing stuff for the federal government. They do human-centered design. I know that's been kind of a big deal in the government for the last couple of years. They need help with doing that. So this company specifically spelled out that they have worked on HCD projects. Another example is the labor categories. As I mentioned with the schedules program, contractors define their own labor categories by title and by definition and by description. This is a good description from a contractor that talks about biologist one. This might be a good fit for that earlier example that I showed you. This biologist identifies, counts, and measures fishes and invertebrates. Guess what? I bet they know what those dracidid mussels are. And they know how to do those population counts and densities and analysis. So this is an example. If you have a requirement and you know what kind of labor you need, you might be able to find a very close or approximate match looking at contractors' price lists and capability statements. The last one is an example of experience that a particular contractor had dealing with a particular agency. And sometimes that's important to you because you might belong to DHS and you need someone that understands DHS language, their rules, the processes that they go through because they're complex. And I know DHS is complex. I mean, TSA is different from Customs and Border Patrol. So you might have your own internal processes that you'd like a contractor to have and already have experience with dealing with. So look for those types of information in the capability statements that contractors publish. All right, we're wrapping it up. So we have some links for you. Tim already shared out this presentation in the chat box, so you can download it from there. As Carla mentioned, if you need to get a copy of this for some reason, or you weren't able to download it, let us know, either Tim, John, myself, or you can contact professional services at gsa.gov, or I think it was PSHC events. Did I get that right, Carla? I hope so. At gsa.gov, and we'll make sure you get a copy of it. But
yes.
I mentioned, okay, thanks, Carla.
It is PSHC events.
At gsa.gov. Perfect.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier, customer service directors. They can be your lifeline. As I said, they can guide you through the MRAS process. They can show you where to get a scope review done. If you don't have this link that's on the next bullet there, they can walk you through the scope review process. They can do it for you. If you just want to give them the information and say, can you do it for me? I don't have time. They'll be happy to do that for you as well. So if you need to find your local customer service director, there's a link for that as well. Lastly, we have a couple of links to the professional services webpage, which can guide you either to the schedules portion that we manage for professional services or some of the IDIQ contracts like OASIS or the follow-on that we're working on right now, OASIS Plus, as well as a link to the acquisition planning packages if you want some sample performance work statements, sample templates that other agencies have used successfully. And then we're almost done. So some more links there, the links that go directly to the OASIS contracts. As I mentioned, they're on the OASIS website, gsa.gov/OASIS. And then there's also the link to the multiple award schedules open solicitation. As I mentioned, this gets updated quarterly. So if you haven't seen it in a while, I recommend, if you want to know the true scope of what's being offered under the schedules program, to take a look at that solicitation. To also see what SINs may have been added, deleted, or edited, or changed since you last took a look at it. And then there's, of course, links to eLibrary, GSA Advantage, as well as Interact, although I'm not sure that link is still alive. Either way, you can access Interact if you go to buy.gsa.gov as well. Interact is a great forum. It's a blog, and there's different communities for each different contract program, or just some general communities as well. So if you want to know more about OASIS, because you're going to be doing a lot of orders with that, there's a community for that. There's a community for OASIS Plus if you want to know about the upcoming requirement or the upcoming program that we're working on. So lots of different communities with Interact. I highly recommend subscribing to a community that meets your typical needs. All right. That's it for the presentation. I know we're just about at time, and I saw that we did have some questions in the chat box. So I think we have time to answer those. All right. First one is, how much of a solid product do you need before you give feedback? How long does it take? What exactly does your feedback look like? Example, do you relook at the NAICS, or should this be NAICS 5541 versus 511210? Good question. If you don't always have to have the most solid product to get a review from us. However, as I mentioned, the more information you can provide, the better recommendation we can provide back. However, sometimes you're really early on in the acquisition planning stage or your market research stage, and you have something that's really not completely put together. That's okay. If you have a draft PWS or SOW in the works, or even a draft SOO, a statement of objectives, that can still help us. If you can provide some more information along with that, including, like the background and mission, that stuff is stuff that you should already know, or your program should already know. Even if they haven't nailed down quite the requirement itself yet. So it doesn't have to be a fully fleshed out PWS. Like I said, we usually just look at drafts anyway. Oftentimes they turn into the final, but it can be an early stage draft, and that's okay. As much information though as you can provide us, including these are the NAICS that we're considering, then we can help provide a recommendation. Once again, the choice of NAICS is up to the OCO. It's not up to us, and any recommendation that we make is not binding, but there are a lot of times requiring office doesn't really know, especially for services requirements, which are complex and messy, what the principal purpose NAICS might be. And so we can help kind of point those in the right direction. And sometimes I will say this too, because part of that question was, do we relook at those NAICS codes? I have seen scope reviews come in particular, usually the OASIS program, where an agency puts a NAICS code like 541990. You're required to put a NAICS code in for OASIS scope reviews. And I'll look through it and I'll say, this is clearly not. This is clearly IT services. And I will make a recommendation back to either use an IT GWAC or the IT schedules program after getting feedback from my IT counterparts, because that's where we are trying to help you mitigate risk and avoid protests because it's truly out of scope. Some agencies are pressured to look at contracts for all types of services, and OASIS is one of those ones, but OASIS does not encompass all services. It doesn't encompass facility services. It does not encompass IT services. So even though that you're looking into it because maybe it's a best-in-class vehicle, we may make a recommendation for a different NAICS, which you can take or leave, but it is a recommendation that we make based off of the review. Next question is, where can I find the NAICS and PSCs? So my go-to source for the NAICS codes is the Census Bureau. They actually have ownership of definitions for the NAICS codes. And I don't know if I have the link on hand, but we can maybe send that out as a follow-up. I'll make sure to put it in the presentation for future use. But the census, if you Google it, census NAICS codes, you'll find the NAICS dictionary. You can look past NAICS codes. I think 2022 is the most current version, but there are some older definitions. So if you're working on an older requirement like a recompete and it used an NAICS code 5 years ago, that definition may have changed. You might want to take a look at the old one versus the new one. See in some cases they've changed, of course. 541714 no longer exists. They got rolled into 541715, I believe. So the PSC codes, I believe there's a link through the FAR, but we'll have to follow up on that one. I don't quite remember where the PSC codes are. I believe it's through the FAR to find the definite list. There's also a list available through the government-wide category management website of all the PSC codes out there. Those also recently were updated in the last year or two. So if it's been a while since you've looked at those, I would download the latest version and take a look to see what the definitions now are of the PSC codes. They've made them better. It seems to make more sense, I think, than the old ones. So hopefully that'll help you choose a more appropriate NAICS code rather than something like an R499 or R799. Turnaround time frame. Thank you, Joshua. I did not answer that part of the multi-part question. Turnaround time frame. We expect to have scope reviews done for professional services turnaround within 5 business days. Usually sooner than that. I try to get them done usually in 2 days if possible. The problem is sometimes obviously we're a small but mighty team of 3. And so if we have somebody out of the office for any reason, that can put a delay on things. The other thing is that if we have to go consult with a partner portfolio, such as facilities or IT, it may take some while to get that feedback from them. Usually we'll try to let you know, of course, if, hey, I think this might be better fit for IT, I'm checking with them. So we'll try to let you know if that's the cause of the delay. But typically five business days turnaround time or less, usually less. Is there a NAICS-SIN crosswalk that you recommend? There are two crosswalks available. There's the schedules, the MAS NAICS crosswalk. You can certainly use that. Every special item number is associated with at least one NAICS code. In some cases, some of them are associated with more than one NAICS code because, for example, I think 54151S, which is the IT services SIN, is associated with, I think, 5415111 and 5415119, a couple different NAICS codes that are also pertinent to IT services. And there's some other SINs out there as well. So there is, I think it's called MAS Available Offerings. If you go to the solicitation, you can download that and it provides the cross-reference for SIN to NAICS. Yes, go ahead and leave if you need to leave. I see there's people that need to leave and we're already at time. The SIN, so the NAICS SIN crosswalk is there on the MAS solicitation. I think it's called the MAS Available Offerings spreadsheet. There's also a NAICS crosswalk for OASIS, which you can download from the OASIS site at gsa.gov/OASIS. All right, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box, and I know we're at time. So Carla, anything, last words?
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you everyone for spending part of your day with us. Just a quick reminder, as Brian mentioned earlier, you can download today's presentation directly from the chat box. And if you're not able to do so, please go ahead and email us at pshcevents@gsa.gov, and we'll be sure to send over a copy to you. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.